What is up, everybody? My name is Brandon, and I'm back with part 2 in my series of marching fundamental videos. In this part of the series, what I'm trying to do is hopefully give you a better understanding of the range of motion, mainly in our joints in our upper body, and specifically really from the elbow down. We'll touch a little bit on the shoulder, but really just to give you a better understanding of what's kind of going on when we go to play our different stroke types and our different grips in relation to marching percussion, and really all percussion to that end. Another benefit to being able to identify where our range of motion is coming from is to be able to identify any points of stress or muscle pain, anything like that. And I've got a big disclaimer about that, which is if you're feeling any sort of pain, stiffness, discomfort, tension, numbness, tingling, anything like that, that's obviously a sign that something in your physiology is not agreeing with what you are doing. So if you're experiencing any of those symptoms, I would implore you to stop and seek out some sort of professional advice to make sure that everything is in good shape. And lastly, what I want to mention, just as good practice, I'm not going to go over this because the video would end up being twice as long, but everything that you do, of course, in the right side of your body or your dominant side, whatever side you're starting with, you should also do in the left side as well. And in some cases, depending on your specific physiology and how well trained up you are, you may need to do it in the left side twice as much, 3 times as much, right? Just to make sure that everything is happening equally. So some good practices to get into while we are working on some of these stroke exercises is to play them, of course, right hand, then left hand, but also to play both hands together in a mirror, of course, so that you can identify and figure out what's going on and to visually see that. But by playing together, that's a great way to really make sure that everything is happening in sync and in tandem and perfectly symmetrically as best as we can manage. Now, moving on, let's go ahead and start identifying some of those joints. So, starting at the top, we've got the shoulder here, which is, of course, a ball and socket type joint. This is what's known as a multi-axial joint, meaning that it can move upon various axes, right? So we can move forward and backward, we can move up and down, and we can go pretty much any way in between, and also rotate around like this. The shoulder does come up a little bit in our playing. It's not going to be super common, but especially at the end, we're going to preview the Molar Stroke. And the shoulder is really sort of what initiates the whole motion of the Molar Stroke. And of course, if you're not entirely sure what I'm talking about, that's okay. I've actually got a video coming in this series about the Molar Stroke entirely. But it's just a really good demonstration that will incorporate all of our joints together in order to facilitate the movement of the Molar Stroke. Next up, we've got the elbow, which is a sort of a hinge type joint, meaning it can move forward and backward like this, but it's also got a bit of a twist. A very disgusting twist. When we start looking at videos, you'll see what I mean, but it also facilitates this motion here, which is known as pronation and supination, which we can move forward in and out like this in a rotary type motion. And what's actually happening are the 2 bones that make up the forearm here, the lower part of the arm, are the radius and the ulna. They're 2 bones that are separate from one another, and they actually start to rotate around one another, and it's very disgusting, disturbing motion. And next up, we've got the wrist, which is a sort of a modified ball and socket joint. The 2 motions that we're going to be mostly concerned with are sort of this forward and back motion like this, as well as a similar motion but on a different axis like this. So we get this motion as well as this motion. And lastly, in order to not complicate things too much, we've also got the fingers, which we're only going to be focused on the open close or the squeeze release motion like this. And of course, that's sort of the range of motion of the fingers. And to go back and kind of review the range of motions here, we've got the elbow, of course, which is sort of like hammer the nail type motion. For the forward motion on the wrist, you can think of knocking on a door, right, like this. For the other motion of the wrist, this sort of sideways motion, all I could think of was throwing a knife. So if you're trying to throw a knife and like stick it into the wall, that type motion. So if you're throwing the knife, I know, that's all I could come up with. I'm sorry, I hate it too. And then of course, for squeezing, you can imagine squeezing whatever, like maybe juicing a lemon or something, I don't know. But for the fingers, that's sort of the motion. And so what we're gonna do here is move over to the practice pad with sticks in hand and apply these motions to our strokes as we know them in percussion. Okay, now that we've transferred over to the practice pad here, what we want to do is translate these motions into some nice, easygoing, nice and slow quarter notes. And I've got this absolute freak of nature here to help me demonstrate those. Firstly, I'm going to skip over the range of motion on the shoulder as it's not super applicable to what we're doing yet, but later on when we incorporate that molar stroke, we will of course be using the shoulder quite a bit. And while we're going through these, what we want to do is kind of just get sort of like 80% full range of motion on these. We don't need to take it all the way to the limit or anything, just while we're learning. As you feel more comfortable, feel free to do that. But for right now, just sort of 80% range will be okay. So let's go ahead and just go straight into the elbow, sort of this up and down motion, or as we called it, sort of hammering the nail, but with a little bit of rotation in the hand here. So let's just take this and turn it into some nice, easygoing quarter notes. Here we go. 1, 2, ready, quarter notes. Very good. Next, we will move on to the wrist here. And what we're going to do is set up in German grip, right? So with the thumb on the side of the stick and with flat tabletop hands here. Here's a quick demonstration of the motion that we're going to be doing. In a minute here, we'll go over the motion that we don't want to be doing. But for right now, here is the proper range of motion here. And let's just do the same thing, just some nice, easygoing wrist strokes. Here we go. 1, 2, ready, quarter notes. Okay, let's adjust slightly here just so we can identify this range of motion. We're going to adjust into French grip, okay, which is a little bit strange for drumline specifically. We don't often come into this grip, but for tenor players, it's not as strange as you might think for doing those scrapes and things like that. The inward motion, this grip really facilitates that sort of motion for moving inward like that. So let's do the same thing. We'll just get our French grip range of motion here. Here we go. Quarter notes. 1, 2, ready. Here we go. And moving on lastly, of course, to the fingers. This is a bit of a strange motion to do at slower tempos. So what we're going to do is first, of course, try to strike the balance on your own. It's sort of a fast slow, if you know what I'm saying. The motion happens quickly, but we're still going at a slow tempo. Okay, and this will demonstrate that you do truly have mastery over the finger range of motion here. So let's do the same thing. We'll get some nice easygoing quarter notes. If the stick kind of bounces around a little bit, that's just sort of bound to happen in the learning stages here. But here we go with some quarter notes with the open close, the push pull, or the squeeze release range of motion from the fingers. Here we go. 1, 2, ready, fingers, go. Very good, very nice. And now I'll sort of demonstrate what I was talking about before with some of the improper use of the wrist range of motion. It sort of falls into wrist, even though it's actually coming from the elbow. So this motion will result in what we call chopping, right? So if you can see here, the stick isn't actually coming in straight down. What's happening is it's sort of bouncing off into sort of a weird axis that we don't want it to. And the reason for that is it ends up affecting our sound quality. Controlling double strokes becomes a lot more difficult, and as best as we can, we want to try to have it come straight up and down like this and not coming in from an angle like this or from the opposite way like this. All right, and lastly, what I'm going to do here is demonstrate the molar stroke, and this is just to kind of keep it fresh in your mind when we go over the full molar stroke in the technique video. It would be good to kind of come back and revisit this with the body awareness fresh in your mind. But here's sort of the range of motion of the molar stroke in slow motion. So you can see it starts in the shoulder, and the tip of the stick stays down. You can sort of think of the wrist as guiding the motion, but really it's being facilitated in the shoulder. So there's this really cool interplay happening between the two. The elbow bends just a little bit to further facilitate this motion. And then what happens is, of course, the wrist turns into a 1,000-pound weight and the stick drops. The fingers come in just a little bit at the end to further provide that control, as well as act as a shock absorption to make sure that we don't get multiple bounces or anything like that we don't want. And they all just come together to really create just an awesome, beautiful use of motion. It's a very efficient stroke type. And it's definitely something that if you haven't started using, especially on the drum set, for example, you can really use to open up your sound and just really free up the way that you play. Alrighty, and that will actually bring us to the end of the body awareness portion of the series. And I know this was a bit of a shorter lesson, but this is honestly the basis upon which all of our technique and all of our fundamentals are built. So it's really something you should spend a lot of time on throughout the series. There's a reason I made this the first actual part of the series. It's super important, really something to be aware of, and will really go a long way to helping you identify any causes of pain, any strain, stress, discomfort that you might be having. And as well as really leading to an efficient use of motion, which is something that I'm a really big proponent of. So yeah, I hope this helps, and I will see you next week where we will really start putting this to use in the accent section of the series. Alrighty, take care till then, bye!